When it comes to retro handhelds, pocketable devices are usually the fan favorites. They're small enough to slide right into your pocket, and you can basically take them with you anywhere you go. For me though, I've never been the biggest fan of this style of retro handhelds. I usually gravitate towards more of the mid-sized devices that pack a little bit more of power within them, but they're not as pocketable as, say, some of these smaller devices. Something that's small enough to slip it in my backpack, but powerful enough to produce things like GameCube emulation or maybe some PS2 emulation. Smaller devices like the Miu Mini or the Miu A30 never really grabbed my attention as much as maybe some other people in this retro handheld space. I definitely thought that they were some great devices and really interesting, but they never convinced me to, bring out my wallet and actually make a purchase. My perspective though on these pocketable devices has completely shifted as of late though, and it's all because of the new kid on the block, and that is the TrimUI Brick. It's a bold move for a company to name their device the Brick, but it actually works flawlessly here, and I love this little thing. It stands at a weird size that's just like the middle child between the Miu Mini and the Miu Mini Plus. But this thing got me to swap teams and actually understand what makes this form factor so great. And today I really wanted to show you what makes this tiny little retro handheld an emulation giant. The TrimUI Brick is an affordable little guy that I managed to get off of AliExpress for just a little bit over $50, which is considerably less than the usual $70 that we spend on like a modern AAA video game title. And that's crazy to me when you consider all that you're getting in this single device for one purchase of like just $50. It's got the same CPU as the TrimUI Smart Pro, a 3.2-inch 1024 by 768 IPS screen. It comes with Bluetooth, it's got Wi-Fi, and it all comes in at about 159 grams. Inside the box, you get the device, but also 2 extra sets of shoulder buttons, which is really cool for swapping them out in case you want to change them out or something breaks or something happens. And then you also get a charging cable. Jumping into the build quality, you can tell as soon as you pick this thing up that it is a high quality and well-designed product. You can immediately tell that it doesn't feel hollow at all, and it actually feels quite dense, which is the biggest selling point for me when it comes to holding the device. Obviously, it's made out of plastic and it's not going to feel, like a $300 handheld, but for $50, this feels phenomenal for what you're getting. A lot of these devices feel kind of empty and almost too light on the inside, but this has a very, very nice dense feeling, and it actually makes it all kind of feel a bit more high quality. It's almost entirely made out of plastic besides this weird metal plate on the back, which is only noticeable on the white model. I'm not really sure why they chose to not match the colorway on the white model and just leave it as a normal metal plate. But if you look at all the other colors in the lineup, you can see that it's also colored to match the device, but only for the white one can you see the shiny metal plate. So if that bugs you, you might want to go for a different color option. Moving on now to the buttons, which in my opinion is probably the biggest selling point for this handheld, and that's because they're the TrimUI classic soft clicky buttons, which they're known for. A lot of people are huge fans of the TrimUI lineup of products, and I've seen so many people saying how much they love their buttons as a whole and how their devices feel whenever you're playing them with the buttons, of course. I now understand the hype behind all of these TrimUI devices, because originally I was like, I don't understand why these TrimUI products are so hyped up, but after using these buttons, I understand the appeal. They're on the quieter side too, which is really nice because I think a lot of people are going to be playing this device out in public whenever it's in your pocket. So if you don't want to draw too much attention to yourself, but you still want the buttons to feel great, this is honestly one of the best options out there on the market right now. There's also a good amount of added function buttons on the front side. You get 2 on the top that you can bind to whatever you want to, as well as a menu button, and then of course your start and select. On the left side, of course, you've got the volume up and volume down button, but then on the right side, you've got the power button, and finally, the thing that I really enjoy the most out of all of these function buttons, and it's this switch here. And you should be able to program this to whatever you want depending on the custom firmware you're using, but by default, this is just a simple mute button, which is actually so genius to me. When you're out in public and you whip this thing out of your pocket, you don't want to panic and turn the volume down as it's blasting, maybe some old SNES games. Instead, you can just simply flip the switch on the right side, and that will automatically mute everything before you even turn the device on. The screen here also is pretty nice. It's nothing incredible to write home about, but it does get very bright, and overall, I'm not a screen snob, but I think this is a pretty great option, and it does the job perfectly. And finally, on the bottom, you've got the SD card slot, the Type-C port, and then the headphone jack. One thing I want to note really quickly, if you do plan on picking this device up, I would recommend you also buy a screensaver immediately with that purchase, because this device, unlike, say an Ambernic device, does not come with a screen protector in the box. And since this is something that you're going to shove in your pocket or maybe throw in a backpack, you're going to want to protect the screen. So getting a screensaver, in my opinion, is very, very fundamental here. All right, we've proven that the build quality is pretty solid, but now we can move on to, I'd say, the cherry on top and what makes this device, kind of come together full circle, and that's with custom firmware. Right away, I'm going to tell you that if you do plan on buying this device and you want to get the most out of it, you're going to want to put custom firmware on it without a doubt. That's not to say that the stock firmware isn't usable, but my word, custom firmware elevates the experience on devices like these so much. I will admit that as a consumer and somebody who's purchasing this product, it does kind of suck that you have to tinker around with it a little bit, but for somebody like me, I actually enjoy that process a lot, so it's not a deal breaker for me. But if you're somebody who just wants to buy something and just immediately play games off of, you can essentially do that here, but you're not going to get the best experience. Right now, I'm using the most common firmware on this thing, and that is called MinUI, and this is amazing. I'm just gonna say it flat out. This is my first time using MinUI, and I've seen it floating around the space and the retro handheld space a lot with different devices, but I've never installed it until now, and I have to say I understand the hype. What makes the software so great is just the fact that it is incredibly simple and straightforward. There's nothing too crazy or too flashy about getting into your games whenever you use MinUI. For me, I have this collections tab set up to show different things like Mario games, Zelda games, Pokemon games, and of course, the GOAT Battle Network games. It's really nice to have a section where I can compile my favorite ROMs from different systems all into one little list. I'm also not a big fan of keeping my entire, game library on every single device that I own, so I try to keep things as slim as possible. So you'll notice I only have a handful of systems here that I'm playing on the Brick. And I also love the fact that you can add like a custom boot logo and kind of add a little splash of personality here and there while still maintaining the simplicity. One downside though about MinUI is that if you do install this custom firmware, you're going to be limited on some of the systems. So like Dreamcast, Nintendo DS, N64, these are different emulators that you're going to have to install extra packs with for the MinUI. So you're going to have to do even another extra layer of tinkering to get those emulators on the actual custom firmware. The simplicity also follows you whenever you're emulating games, so you've got a nice little list of different options and things that you can tinker with whenever you're playing and emulating a game. Getting the games to look the way that you want to, whether it's adding CRT effects or shaders, or maybe changing the aspect ratio, adding different color grading, maybe tinkering with the shortcuts and controls, all of those things can be done in MinUI, and it's extremely straightforward to follow and to use the menu system. So whenever you combine the in-game emulation options with the overall software that's running through MinUI on the console, it all kind of comes together to form a nice little package in a nice little size here. Now, when it comes to emulation performance, you can expect pretty smooth results, I'd say, for all of your retro systems up to and including PS1. However, it's a D-pad and not an analog stick, so those games might not feel the most intuitive, but the option is there, and I had a great time messing around with things like Gran Turismo or Crash Bandicoot or something else on the PS1. I did try getting N64 set up and running, but for some reason I couldn't get my joystick to work with N64 games. Again, this is like an extra added pack that I had to add onto MinUI because MinUI itself doesn't come with N64. Obviously I don't have an analog stick, so you need something to switch between the analog stick and actually using the D-pad, but I was having trouble with N64 and also DS games in the MinUI firmware. Everything else though, excluding N64 and Nintendo DS, was flawless and was a really enjoyable experience on this device. In particular, I think SNES looks amazing on this thing alongside a lot of GBA games. I've been going through A Link to the Past for the first time ever, which I know is a classic, and I know a lot of people who find out that I've never played A Link to the Past probably want to murder me, so that's why I'm trying to get through it and play through it right now on my Brick. For a lot of these systems like SNES, it's not perfectly scaled, but for me, I'm not looking for a perfect, integer scaling or anything that's going to make the pixels look absolutely perfect for me. Whenever you apply the crisp filter in the MIUI, and then you also just kind of stretch out the SNES game, for example, to the rest of the screen, I think it looks pretty amazing. Unless you're somebody who wants the pixels to look absolutely perfect and not stretched out, this device should meet your needs. And of course, you've got Game Boy Color games, which run great and look amazing on this thing. You can run through the different color effects too through the MIUI software. And just overall, playing any retro classic on this device has been so fun for me, and just a great way to experience and relive a lot of these great titles. I just made a video reviewing the Retroid Pocket 5, and in that same video, I discuss a lot of the tinkering that you have to do with the higher end emulation devices such as Switch or maybe even Wii U, and having to deal with, trying to get the perfect frame rate, the perfect turnip drivers to work. All of this stuff has been kind of overwhelming for me. So to switch gears a bit and just return to a more simple device that's going to play the classic retro games flawlessly, and you're not going to have any issues with frame rate, and it's just going to work, has been really, really nice for me. Playing this device and setting it up reminds me of why I got into this hobby in the first place and why I love these little things so much. And I hate to admit it, but it really is the form factor and the size of this device, man. I have completely swapped my perspective. I am now, team pocketable device. I think that this is such a fun form factor, and fitting it in your pocket is just an added bonus. And one thing that's been really fun for me lately has been finding the right type of games to play on a device as small as this one. Most of the time, you're going to be out and about playing this thing, or just pulling it out of your pocket to play maybe for 10-15 minutes at a time. It's short little bursts of gaming. And so that means the type of game that you want to play is something that you can easily pick up and drop whenever you need to. I've been adding to my collection of games that fit this style. For example, you've got, of course, the platformers, the classic Mario games, but also I noticed that Kirby works really great here on this device. A lot of the GBA Kirby games and even the DS game work really well for that pick up and play type of style. But I did want to ask and get some recommendations. If anybody has some games that you think work perfectly for a smaller pocketable device like this, please let me know in the comments. I'm trying to create a good list here of games that you can quickly just open up and play for 15 minutes. I also talk a lot on this channel about being more conscious for where your time goes with your technology, and I've been kind of addicted in the past to things like social media and just been stuck on my phone. And while this isn't necessarily a perfect solution, I do think that pulling this, Game Boy out of your pocket and playing this for 15-20 minutes instead of doom scrolling on a social media app is way more healthy and more stimulating for your brain than any social media app or something on your smartphone could also produce. All right, now we can talk about the deal breakers and the alternatives. There are a couple of things that I wanted to just have you consider before you potentially spend some money on this thing. And the biggest one is obviously just the form factor that I've been discussing. If you're not a big fan of smaller devices, or maybe you have, larger hands, I don't think that this device is going to work out too great for you. If you're willing to put up with some hand cramps and you do have larger hands, then you could go ahead and try and bite the bullet, but I wouldn't really recommend this for a lot of people who can't handle the smaller form factor. Even myself, just playing this thing for like 30 to 40 minutes gives me some cramps, and it does feel pretty uncomfortable after a certain amount of time has passed. It's nothing horrible, obviously, but it definitely isn't as comfortable as, a lot of other devices on the market. But if you are looking for a device that's a little bit more comfortable, and it does come with an analog stick that might be better for playing games like PS1 or potentially N64, then go ahead and look into the 40XXV from Anbernic. I think this is a good alternative for those of you who want a bigger device, but a similar vertical handheld. This one has a 4-inch screen, and it comes in that bigger form factor, like I said, so your hands feel way more comfortable. And then it's also got that little thumbstick on the bottom left, which I personally think is really ugly. I'm not a big fan of throwing a thumbstick on a vertical handheld, but I did want to give you this option in case you'd rather spend your money here. I also want to mention a heat issue that some other reviews have also discussed. You can see in the Retro Game Core video where he actually had a device that could measure the thermals of the back plate where that little metal spot is. That thing actually gets pretty warm to the touch. It's nothing like scorching hot, but I also did notice this whenever I was playing the system for longer than like 30 to 45 minutes, is that spot in particular would get a little bit warm. It wouldn't be unpleasant, but it definitely definitely gets a little bit warm. So if you're sensitive to something like that, I would definitely steer clear of this device. But that's really all the deal breakers I have. I think there's nothing else to complain about with this device, and especially with that really cheap $50 price tag. And I'm just honestly surprised that the Brick got me to actually appreciate this form factor for once that has been so popular and dominant in the handheld space. Again, I've been playing through A Link to the Past, and it's actually been really fun to play that classic game for the first time and experience it on this handheld. And this device has actually sparked more enjoyment for playing games than something like the RP5, which is crazy to even say. And it just proves to me again that it's really not about the emulation performance, but instead about, you know, what it feels like to play these games and actually have the convenience and the ability to play them whenever you're out and about. But yeah, that's about it. I felt like yapping about this device for the entire video. It's been a relatively longer video. I appreciate all of the people who have been tuning in. There's been a lot of new people here on the channel. I'm trying to hopefully produce more videos every single week for everybody who's interested in watching. I appreciate anybody who makes it to the end of the video, and thank you all so much for, I believe we're at 1,500 subscribers, which is incredible, and I've had a blast building this channel and sharing my experience with some of these devices, and it's just been a great time. So if you're here and you're new, thank you so much for giving me your time and actually wanted to hang out with me while I rant about these goofy little devices for so long. I hope you have a great day. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you guys hopefully in the next video.